Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ahmad Faiz bin Abdul Razak and I would like to present about fish invasive species in Malaysian freshwater bodies. Background of studies. The Malaysian water ecosystem have been facing threats caused by the invasive fish species. Invasive species are animals or plants that have been introduced by human interference which are non-native to the area. Rogers 2017. Peacock bass, Nile tilapia, algae sycamore catfish, African catfish, and Asian red-tailed catfish are several fish species that have been identified to be invasive in Malaysia. Problem statement. Invasive species create ecological impact that can disperse across the food webs, inducing trophic cascade. David et al. 2017. Invasive species colonies often have negative economic effects such as decrease in native commercial sports and forage fish populations. The lack of information and undocumented records regarding the status of invasive fish species in the country will hinder the efforts in mitigating the impact and threats that they have caused. Significance of studies. This study is documentation of fish invasive species in Malaysia by compiling past studies regarding the invasive fish species. This study will be beneficial for the ecological and conservation of aquatic ecosystem and native indigenous fish species. By studying the invasive fish species in Malaysia, the control measure can be devised to counter the threats that was posed by their establishment. The objective of the studies is to describe the characteristics of invasive fish species in Malaysia, to determine the impact of invasive fish species in Malaysian freshwater bodies, and to suggest the possible ways to control and counter the impact of invasive species. Taxonomical review. Cephalosaurus, popularly known as peacock bass, are aggressively energetic piscivores that eat a broad variety of food. They spawning around 2,000 to 3,000 eggs per brood and reproduce all year with research during the wet season. Orichromys niloticus or Nile tilapia exhibit trophic plasticity. They are known to be typically macrophages. Nile tilapia is a polygynous species in which males actively interact with one another, forming a territorial-based hierarchy. Hippostomus blacostomus is an omnivore that feeds on algae, plant matter, periphyton, dendrites, and benthic aquatic animals. Due to its mostly herbivorous or dendrivorous diet, it has rather longer intestine. The African catfish is a tropical and subtropical freshwater native fish. African catfish can feed on broad varieties of species because of their diverse anatomical adaptation for eating. Asian red-tailed catfish is an omnivore catfish that consumes both fresh and frozen meals. It is a catfish species with rapid development, huge size, wide adaptability, and strong resistance. This fish poses a threat to the local ecosystem because of its size, aggressions, and predatory behavior. Distribution in Malaysia. According to the current research, peacock bass have infiltrated all peninsular Malaysia, with no records discovered in Kelantan, Sabah, or Sarawak. Khalil et al. 2021. Nile tilapia is present in the peninsula of Malaysia, Sabah, and also Sarawak. Algae sycamore catfish introduction was mainly from the ornamental fish trade. Thus, every aquarium pet stores in the country have the potential of introduction of this species. The African catfish is present in the peninsula of Malaysia, Sabah, and Sarawak. The Asian red-tailed catfish is identified to be present in the peninsula of Malaysia and Sabah and none in Sarawak. Ecology of invasive species. Cephalosaurus is a visual predator of the day. It has a clear preference for aquatic habitats with high visibility of water. It is Eurohyaline, although it's mostly in fresh water. They require very clear water, benthic area, and moderate temperature for both reproductions and also feeding. Orichromys niloticus have developed in the marginal waters and floodplain pools as riverine fishes, but they have been adapted to lacustrine conditions. They are resistant to a wide variety of environmental factors and highly adaptable to their surroundings. Hippostomus blacostomus is usually inhabits slow-flowing lower reach of rivers between the lower falls and the estuarine regions throughout its native range. H. Hippopotamus, inhabits anthropogenetically modified marine environments as an invasive species. Clarius gyrfinus is an ubiquitous species found in all aquatic ecosystems. They are very adaptive to harsh environmental conditions and can have a pH range of 6.5 to 8.0 and able to survive in very turbid water and can endure temperatures of 8 degrees Celsius to 35 degrees Celsius. The Asian red-tailed catfish is present in large upland rivers and is widespread in areas with varying depths and rocky bottoms, and grows well in waters of varying chemical composition and temperature range. This species' native habitat have a distinct seasonal tropical monsoon cycle with a dry, cold season. Impact of invasive species. In Brazil and Puerto Rico, invasive sea-class species affect the reduction of the population of local species. Khalil et al. 2020. Predation, competition, and modification of food change have a negative effect on ichthyofauna and aquatic ecosystems. In Madagascar, the reduction of native fish diversity was associated with the introduction of O. niloticus. In Malaysia, O. niloticus pose a threat due to their potential in altering native fish community composition. Erosion, sedimentation, and increased turbidity can be caused by the burrows formed by hippopotamus species during reproduction. Impact of these species include the decrease in habitat quality for algae-dependent organisms and reduced sources of food for other aquatic organisms. Clarius gyrfinus, C. gyrfinus, shows the ability to utilize prey ranging from plants to fish and other vertebrates. Potential ecological issues such as the depletion of habitats in natural inland water are consequences of the unlawful and indiscriminate introduction of this fish into India and other countries. For the Asian red-tailed catfish, this fish is a threat because of its size, aggressiveness, and predatory behavior. The competition for sources such as habitats, spawning grounds, and food can outdriven the native fish species to extinction. The controlling of invasive fish species in Malaysia. In Malaysia, there are no documented efforts for the peacock bass, but in the United States, it can be controlled by altering the environment for the fish species, such as water temperature and turbidity. In the United States, Nile tilapia introductions are limited to catchments where it has already established itself. Domestic strains, such as more rounded body and red tilapia strains that studied in Malaysia should be promoted as they are unable to thrive outside of the fish farm. In Malaysia, there are no documented efforts for the algae sakuma catfish, but in the United States, the catfish can be effectively removed physically by netting and the use of chemicals such as biocides and also herbicides in their burrows. For the African catfish, commercialization of the catfish should be reduced in Malaysia as a method of prevention for overpopulation of the species. And in India, the fishing regimes can lower the juvenile populations rapidly but will not result in the population extermination. For the Asian red-tailed catfish, there are only few studies that have been published on ways to control the population, but precautions can be taken in Malaysia as any new species, including the Asian red-tailed catfish, requires special written approval from the Director General of Fisheries Malaysia. Recommendation in managing the population of fish invasive species. First, education, which are important to instill the understanding of fish invasive species among the people. Education program should aim to make it socially undesirable to introduce alien species in the wild. National Action Plan. The National Action Plan on Invasive Alien Species, constructed and published by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Industries of Malaysia. These planning and efforts that have been devised are the early steps in mitigating the threats that can be posed. Next is law enforcement. Any alien species that are to be brought into Malaysia must undergo an invasive risk assessment. Fines and inspections should be enforced for the importation and aquarium trades. Locals can report any suspicious activities to the officials. In conclusion, invasive fish species in Malaysia have adapted and established their presence. Invasive fish species can give very harmful impact to the ecosystem and the biodiversity of the Malaysia, especially in the long terms. To solve this issue, more research is required. Malaysians should take the issues seriously to ensure the richness and uniqueness of the Malaysian's biodiversity so that it can thrive for years to come. That's all for me. Thank you and see you next time.